Minister's principal secretary resigned, and we know that it's because of the bribery and corruption scandal that's touched the Prime Minister's office. Now, if the principal secretary is innocent, why did the Prime Minister accept his resignation? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I accepted Gerald Butts' resignation, and I have to say he served our country with integrity and sage advice, and I thank him for his service and his continued friendship. Mr. Butts has always put respect for our institutions as his very highest priority. And that's why he took the decision to resign, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Why did Mr. Butts resign? The Prime Minister's story on this has changed multiple times since the scandal was first brought to light. And now we find out that the key strategist in the Liberal Prime Minister's office, the architect of the Liberal government policy, has resigned. But in so doing, he is pretending that he has done nothing wrong. So if the Prime Minister is so sure that these allegations are false, and if Mr. Butts did nothing wrong, then why did the Prime Minister accept his resignation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Gerald Butts has always believed in the confidence that Canadians must have in our institutions, and indeed believe deeply in the work that this government needs to continue to do to deliver for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. That is why he made the decision to step down, to step away, because the work that this government is doing, and indeed the confidence that Canadians must have in their institutions and the processes we have, comes before all else.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are losing confidence in this government because every single day the story changes. So now the explanation is that Gerald Butts was so good at his job that he just had to resign in scandal. But it's a continuation of a theme we've seen for days now. First, he tried to blame the former Attorney General. Then he tried to blame Scott Bryson. All the while, he was directing Liberals on the Justice Committee to block attempts at inviting key officials to testify. Do these sound like the actions of a man who has nothing to hide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As always and will always stand up for the institutions and the principles that underlie the strength of our democracy. We're unequivocal about that. That's why, whether it's respecting the independence of members of parliamentary committees or making sure that we are allowing for the full scope of judicial independence, we will always defend the systems and the institutions that keep Canada safe and prosperous as a democracy.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when these allegations were first raised, the Prime Minister tried to dismiss them as being completely false. His story then changed multiple times. He's blamed several individuals, and now his principal advisor has quit. But there is one person who could clear up a lot of the issues around this situation, and that's the one person that the Prime Minister won't allow to speak. He continually speaks for the Attorney General, but I believe Canadians would like to hear from her, herself. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing and waive the attorney-client privilege that he claims to have and let the former Attorney General speak?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
With everything this government has done, domestically, internationally, internally, we always consistently stand up for the rule of law, for the independence of our judiciary. We will continue to do that and continue to do the right thing. In the matter of solicitor-client privilege, the member opposite must know that there are real dangers of unintended consequences, particularly on the two court cases currently wending their way through the courts. That is why I have asked our Attorney General to give me advice on the very important matter.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I think the unintended consequences he's worried about is losing more key staff in the Prime Minister's office as the truth comes out on this. So it's clear that we're just going to get the rehashed talking points and the Prime Minister's rhetoric, trying to convince Canadians that there's nothing to see here. So I'll ask him a very specific question, and this is one that should be easy for him to answer. The Budget Implementation Act became law on June 21st, 2018, which means that's when deferred prosecution agreements became possible. Can the Prime Minister tell this House how many times since June 21st of last year did Gerald Butts meet with the former Attorney General?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our cabinet gets together every Tuesday to talk about a broad range of issues. We continue to meet regularly as MPs, as caucus members. Members in my office are engaged constantly with various departments and with ministers to stand up for Canadian jobs, to make sure we're moving forward in the right way, to make sure we're standing up for the institutions and principles that underpin our democracy. We will always work hard to make sure we're delivering properly for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Minister of Economic Development and the Minister of Public Services and Procurement declared on television that it's important that we have the version of the former Minister of Justice. We agree. This is why we were disappointed when Liberal members of the Justice Committee refused to invite and keep refusing to invite Gerald Butts. It's clear that the member for Vancouver-Granville wants to give her version of the story. The Prime Minister has given us 5 versions so far. Will he allow the former Minister of Justice to speak by waiving privilege? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are getting advice on the solicitor-client privilege. We want to act in respect of all laws and rules. The Honourable Member. All the Prime Minister has to do is to allow her to speak, to waive privilege. He refuses to do so. The Justice Committee is refusing to do its work and investigate these serious allegations of political obstruction. Canadians want the truth. They want transparency.
Be free from even the perception of political interference and uphold the highest levels of public confidence.
That was the former Minister of Justice. That was her speaking. If he won't waive privilege, will he call for an independent inquiry? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have entire confidence in the Ethics Commissioner. We trust him to do his work. We support him in this work, and we will welcome anything he has to say with great openness. The member across the way should know that members of the Justice Committee decide on what they will do. They are masters of their committee.
Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
So Jerry Butts, the architect of Sunny Ways, has been packing under a storm of corruption. So it's up to this Prime Minister to come clean over allegations that his office attempted to strong-arm the Attorney General into taking a fall in one of the biggest corruption cases in memory. Now, this Prime Minister promised to do things differently, but the SNC scandal is corroding his credibility. So he needs to stop hiding. Will he waive solicitor-client privilege, and will he agree to an independent inquiry to restore the confidence of the Canadian people in him as Prime Minister?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have an Ethics and Conflict of Interest Commissioner to determine the reality in issues just like this. He is pursuing his investigation, and as I said from the very first day, we welcome that work. In the matter of solicitor-client privilege, it's obviously a matter we have to consider very carefully. There is a real risk of unintended consequences, particularly on the 2 court cases currently underway right now. But I have asked our Attorney General for advice on this matter.
Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
I'm listening really hard, but for a Prime Minister who claims to be innocent, my God, he's sounding guilty. Because the client here is the Prime Minister, and the question is whether he tried to strong-arm his former Attorney General and then had her fired because she wouldn't take a fall in one of the biggest corruption cases. So stop hiding behind the legal games. Let her speak. Enough with this, he said. And then he said something different. And when that didn't work, he said something else about what she was supposed to say. Just let her speak. Do the right.
I remind the member for Timmins, Jane Bay, of the rule, of course, that he's familiar with, that one must direct one's comments to the chair. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the member opposite who's speaking disparagingly about laws and legal issues, we continue to respect our system of justice. We respect the independence of the judiciary, and we will always do our work that way. That is why we welcome the news that the Ethics Commissioner is going to be looking into this matter, and we will fully cooperate with them. That is something that Canadians expect as we uphold the highest standards of their faith in our institutions.
Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, what Canadians are asking very clearly and very simply is, why do we have to continuously hear the story from the Prime Minister's point of view as opposed to hearing it from the former Attorney General's point of view? Now, I know one could possibly say as an excuse that sometimes we perceive situations differently depending upon what gender we are, but this is the rule of law. And, Mr. Speaker, what Canadians want to hear specifically is, what does the former Attorney General have to say? Will the Prime Minister waive his solicitor-client privilege?
Honourable Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the Prime Minister has asked me for a legal opinion on the question of solicitor-client privilege. I am studying that. I'm studying that issue, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. I'm having trouble hearing the Honourable Minister of Justice. I know members want to hear both the question and the answer, so we'll have a little order. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, to continue, I am studying the issue and will provide my legal opinion in due course. It would be inappropriate for me, Mr. Speaker, to say anything more.
The member for Milton. Order.
This Attorney General has already said many things about what he believes. The former Attorney General believes, thinks, or even did. So therefore, it should take him very simply not much time to determine whether or not she can go ahead and speak. But now that I have him on his feet, Mr. Speaker, I'm very curious. Last week, in a newspaper report, this Attorney General indicated that the matter regarding deferred remediation agreements and SNC-Lavalin was very much still alive and sitting on his desk. I'd like to ask the member, conveniently from Montreal, whether or not he has made a decision on the SNC-Lavalin issue.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I stated in that interview the law of Canada as it was passed and as is still the case, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment further.
The
Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Order, please. Mr. Speaker, last week we had the resignation of the former Minister of Justice. Yesterday, the resignation of the Prime Minister's Principal Secretary, who is also his best friend. And this following serious allegations of pressure by the PMO on the former Attorney General. And this in a matter of bribery and fraud. Canadians want the truth. Only one person can give it to us. Why will the Prime Minister not waive privilege? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Or rather, the Minister. The Minister, former Minister, shared a letter with all Canadians. All members are here. All of us here are here to work hard for Canadians. That's my priority. It's priority of this government and members on our side. We're working for Canadians. That is what we've been doing. That is what we will continue to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, every day since the revelations of the Globe and Mail, the Prime Minister has been giving us a new version, and the story seems to change by the day. Yesterday, his principal secretary, also his close friend, resigned, saying he'd done nothing wrong. And yet, the situation is a very serious one. We're hearing talk of political interference in our justice system. Only one person can give us the truth, and that is the former Attorney General. Will the Prime Minister simply allow her to speak? The Honourable House Leader. Mr. Speaker, once again, the member across the way knows The principal secretary shared his letter, shared his reasons. The Prime Minister accepted Gerald Butts' resignation. And we, on this side of the House, we will continue working hard for Canadians. We believe in the independence of the judicial system, and we will encourage them to do their work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, for the last 13 days, the Prime Minister's answers on this issue have been all over the map. First, he denied. Then there was a whisper campaign out of his office insulting and disparaging the former Attorney General. And now, Mr. Speaker, there is the answer of, it's not my fault, it's got to have been somebody else's fault. And his principal secretary has resigned, but for no reason. This government is in absolute chaos and disarray. Canadians deserve answers. We need to hear from the former Attorney General. Will the Prime Minister waive privilege and let her speak?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I have stated in French, I will now state in English once again. The former Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister has shared his reasons publicly with all Canadians. The Prime Minister has accepted his resignation. When it comes to the independence of our judicial system or officers of Parliament, we respect their work. That is a clear contrast from the previous government that constantly undermined the work that they did. We will not do that on this side, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue working hard for Canadians, the very people that sent us here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader. Order.
That was not an answer, Mr. Speaker, and that was frankly embarrassing to see the Government House Leader do that. Mr. Speaker, there is nobody who is watching this scandal saying that there's nothing to see here. From political commentators to the media to legal experts, there are questions that have to be answered. The actions of this government are actions of a government and a Prime Minister who have something to hide. So, Mr. Speaker, there is somebody who can answer. That's the former Attorney General. We want answers. Canadians want answers. Will you let her speak?